Today we're kicking off our next session of Fridays on the Farm, and we're going to talk about your budgeting and financing goals for 2021. How do you set those budgets up? What kind of expenses do you need to plan for? And how can we help to plan for a profitable 2021? As we get started talking about our financial goals, the very first question we all have to ask is, what are your goals? Last week we talked about goal setting and what to look for as you're trying to decide those things. So as we go through this, keep in mind whatever your goals are and what you're willing to do to achieve those goals. The first step as we look at our financial goals is to know what we have to work with on the front end. There's lots of different kind of inventories you can do. We start with a resource inventory. What do you have to work with? This can be everything from equipment to your livestock to your forage production. And don't forget about your people. Who are those people in your human resources that you have to look to help make your farm successful? But as we're talking about financial goals, we also need to look at your financial inventory. This is a handy packet that can be found on the U of A website. The link is at the end of this presentation as well. And it just gives you a chance to go through and list out what all are your financial accounts. Where do you have all that information? How can it be accessed? That way, at the end of the year, as you're looking over everything, you can make sure you're where you need to be. And in order to be successful in our financial goals, the first thing we have to think about is, how are we going to keep up with these records? U of A does have a template that's a record book. We have some here in stock. These are paper books if that's the way you like to do business. These books go through everything from expenses to income and everything else you would need to track all your financial things. And here's an example of that farm expenses page. So throughout the year, as things are happening, you have all this information there. This is going to help you when you start to do your farm taxes because it breaks it down by those Schedule F Part 3s. And when you sit down to make your goals, you know what you spent the last year. So as we're planning and making our budget for next year, having these records to look at can make a world of difference. Even if you're not a paper person, there's a lot of digital avenues out there for record keeping. This is an example of a screenshot from QuickBooks. Kansas State had a great worksheet on how to use QuickBooks for farm accounts. That's also linked at the end of this presentation if that's something you may be interested in. However you want to keep records, just make sure that you have a way to keep them that works for you, a way that you're willing to keep up with so that when you get time to do your financial goals for the upcoming year, you know where you stand. It'll also make taxes a whole lot easier, and we could all use that. Now it's time to look at your actual budgets. On the U of A website, there's livestock enterprise budgets. There's also row crop budgets if that's something you're interested in as well. And depending on where you fall, are you producing your own hay? Do you market your calves in the fall at the time you wean them? Or do you hang on to them a little bit longer? Are you a spring calver? Do you produce your hay or do you purchase your hay? These are all options, and these enterprise budgets can help you budget for that operation. This is just an example. This is the budget example we're going to walk through today. Even if you don't like a digital system, if you want to do it on paper, these are still important things to keep in mind as you're making that budget to help you reach your financial goals. This is the front page when you download that template. We're looking today at the purchasing hay for spring calvers example. Like I said, there are several other examples. Make sure you use the one that works for your operation. And if you want to do these digitally and you're having trouble figuring things out, don't hesitate to give us a call at the office. We're happy to help you walk through it. There's lots of things we need to put in on the front end. How big is our herd? Do we have 40 cows for this example? We have 2 bulls on that 40 head of cows. We're also running at a 0% death loss. When you're budgeting, don't be afraid to put that number a little bit higher than what you expect. What's your calving rate percentage? What percentage of your heifers are calving? Your death loss for heifers, death loss for steers. How many cows do you plan on culling? What about your replacement heifer rate? Do you plan on purchasing any replacements? This is just information about your current herd so that we can help figure the rest of the numbers. Then we look at, what do we expect to come in? When you cull those cows, how many do you plan to cull? What price do you expect to get on those heifer calves that you're selling and your steer calves you plan on selling? Again, these are expected prices because we're budgeting. Don't be afraid to budget on the low end of what you expect to bring for them. That way, if they do better, you're only helping yourself in the long run. Then we get down to operating expenses. And sometimes it's hard for everybody to remember what all goes into making these operations work. And that's what I like about this budget is it breaks it down. So let's look at each one of those tabs. The first thing is feed cost. Remember, we've spent about a month talking about herd improvements. We're not going to feed our retained calves the same way we're going to feed our herd bulls. If our herd bulls are getting pulled off during the off season so that we have that small breeding cycle, they may not be getting fed the same thing that our cows are. We talked about managing replacement heifers. They're a little bit different as well. So this same book lets you go through and figure what's it going to cost to feed each one of those individual groups, and we'll funnel that number back over to your original homepage. Health expenses are the same way. We take care of our calves differently than we take care of our cows, differently than we take care of our bulls. When we talk about our veterinary expenses, you have everything from your vaccination plan, worming, other parasite control. On our bulls, we think about breeding soundness exams. Maybe that's one of your herd goals this year is to make sure your bulls are performing where they're supposed to be. Figure the price of that bull test into your budget on the front end. Maybe you want to cull cows out that aren't performing where they're supposed to be. So pregnancy checking is in your budget for the upcoming year. This is where all of our goal setting comes in together. And we want to have our goal set on the front end so then we can go in with our budgets and make them work to make sure that our goals are feasible for the current year. Now let's look at our forage costs. Again, I want to remind you this budget is based on purchasing hay and not producing your own hay. So the majority of your expenses may be in pasture management. Are you fertilizing according to soil tests? What's it going to cost to lime this year? Not only is it going to cost for that, we have to think about the fuel of that machinery that's going to put it out. If you use litter, what's that application cost that goes along with it? This is a good place to decide, can you afford to fertilize and lime according to soil tests? We do recommend that if you can't quite meet the rates the first year, consider having your land rather than halving the application. Focus on maybe we only take care of this field this year and get it up to par. And then next year, the other field may be our main goal. So take that. Don't be afraid to slow down and take time to make that decision. Marketing our cattle aren't free. Even when those calves go to the barn to be sold, the sale barn makes a commission off of you. Even if you're paying somebody to haul your cattle or you're putting the miles in to haul your cattle. Every mile you drive is not only fuel, but it's also truck maintenance. Then you think about that brucellosis fee and checkoff dollar and anything else you may need to consider. Make sure you're factoring that into your budget as well. Then we have some of our building and equipment. This is again where having that resource inventory on the front end can really help you decide where you're at. This budget is pretty extensive. It goes through a lot of different values. I'm not an accountant, and I'm sure if you need help, your accountant will be more than happy to walk you through it. But these are already built in as well. So this will help you kind of decide what are things worth. Can you afford that fence maintenance this year? Maybe those fences are in bad enough shape, it's time to build new ones. So let's look at the material cost per foot and see if maybe that's a cheaper operation. What about your stock trailer? What kind of condition is it in this year? Can it keep going? Is it time to replace it? Your corral and chute systems. You can always add to these budget line items as well if there's something else you feel like it's missing that's important to your operation. Machinery is the same way. What is the condition of that hay rake when you finished up hay season this year? Are you going to need to replace it for the upcoming year? Or are you looking at purchasing all your hay, so maybe that hay equipment isn't the most important thing on your machinery budget? So make sure you're keeping factors like that in mind as you're budgeting. The last thing we want to look at is what about the stock you have to purchase? Maybe you have a large enough herd, you're not purchasing a lot of stock, but lots of times we're at least purchasing bulls outside the farm. Maybe you're buying some replacement heifers because that's a better option for your herd right now. Maybe you're culling some old cows and replace them with some new ones. Think about what you expect to spend, how long you expect to be able to use them, and factor that into your budget as well. So once you have all that in, you can go back to this home page, and a lot of those numbers have worked their way in. And you can see what is your operating expense going to be for the year versus what your total revenue is. Now look back at your goals. If one of your goals was a new hay rake, this is where we can kind of look at the numbers and decide, is that going to be feasible this year? Maybe we need to move some of our other budgeting around to be able to reach the goals we want to reach. Also, don't forget about your resources that you have in people. Building relationships on the farm is one of the most important things you can do. None of us can farm on our own. Even if you are a lone operator, most of us have to work with a bank at some point, whether that's a loan for a piece of equipment, maybe it's a loan to get started, whether that's land or cattle, whatever it is. Having that relationship at the bank can make a world of difference. Where do you plan on marketing your cattle? Knowing that barn owner so that you can call him the week before and say, hey, I'm bringing you a group of 40 preconditioned calves, gives him time to contact buyers, which can at the end of the day help you in the long run. Have a relationship with your local veterinarian that works with your herd. There are lots of places you can buy vaccines and all that's fine, but keep in mind when you need something from your veterinarian, it's important to have that relationship so that they can help you when you need their help. Where do you buy your feed or your hay or wherever else? Make sure that you have that relationship so that they have what you need, you know what you're getting, and you can work with them. We all have to buy equipment at some point. Having those relationships can make a huge difference. If you have trouble with any of your financial stuff, having an accountant that knows you and knows your operation can help you quite a bit in the long run. And don't forget about other people that may be a part of your operation that sometimes you take for granted. Whether those are parents or siblings or spouses or even your kids that are part, make sure that those who are investing in your operation have a voice in what you're doing and they know kind of what's going on so that everybody can help work towards the same goals. If you need help working on your budgets for the upcoming year or trying to figure out how you're going to reach those financial goals, don't be afraid to give me a call at the office. I'm always more than happy to help. And here are some links to some of those resources that we went through during the presentation. If that budget in Excel looks a little intimidating, don't be afraid to give me a call. I'll help you through it. There's also a user's guide on the website as well, if that's helpful. Thank you for joining us for this week's session of Fridays on the Farm. Next week, we're going to continue our discussion on planning, and we're going to talk about your herd management goals. What kind of timeline do you need to have, and how do we plan to take care of these girls in 2021? See you next Friday.